Hey, what's up everyone? I am in real need of a few iron flesh. Today we are talking about the Souls series. Souls is a series of action role-playing games developed by FromSoftware. The series began with the release of Demon's Souls for the PlayStation 3 in 2009, and was followed by Dark Souls and its sequels, Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, in the 2010. The series creator, Hidetaka Miyazaki, served as director for each of them with the exceptions of Dark Souls 2 and the externally developed Demon's Souls remake. Dark Souls was one of the most brutal games in history. The games take place within a dark medieval fantasy setting, where the player's character fights against knights, dragons, phantoms, demons, and other monstrous or supernatural entities. The accretion, loss, and recovery of souls is central to the narrative and gameplay of Souls games. Another recurring motif is that of a once powerful and prosperous kingdom which has fallen into ruin. For example, the setting of Demon's Souls, Boletaria, in which the player attempts to halt the spread of a demon-infested fog that threatens to consume the world. The protagonist of each Souls game can have a varying gender, appearance, name, and starting class via character creation. Players can choose between classes, including knights, barbarians, thieves, and mages. Each class has its own starting equipment and abilities that can be tailored to the player's experience and choices as they progress. The player gains souls from gameplay battles which act as both experience points to level up and as currency to buy items. Souls gained are usually proportional to the difficulty of fighting certain enemies. The more difficult an enemy, the more souls the player will gain. Dark Souls takes place in Lordran, a dark fantasy version of a mythologized medieval Europe. While its grandiose architecture suggests Lordran was once a mighty kingdom, the player's quest begins at the end of the Age of Fire, when there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights. This trope of the dying earth is demonstrated in the sluggish, exhausted movement of many of the enemies and is reflected in the fragility of the on-screen character controlled by the player. An early example of this dying earth trope can be seen in the work of Lord Byron, a major figure in British Romanticism. In his 1816 poem, Darkness, Byron imagines an earth beneath an extinguished sun. The last denizens of the planet huddle for warmth around forests and dwellings, burnt for beacons, and the final two survivors meet in a bitter encounter, beside the dying embers of an altar place. This use of fire as refuge prefigures the use of bonfires in Dark Souls, as rare safe havens within an otherwise menacing world. The architecture of the game's setting is inspired by real-world historical styles, including classical Roman and medieval Gothic architecture, and these influences lend to the surroundings a sense of times long past. A question remains: why would such apocalyptic themes prove to be so popular in two very different historical time periods? Well, to put it simply, we share with the Romantic period a world of uncertainty. An obsession with ruins and ancient structures was prevalent too in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Similar to the ways in which early Gothic British writers gravitated towards narratives set in spooky medieval castles, an obsession with ruins and ancient structures was prevalent too in the work of the British Romantic writers. The original Dark Souls took the gaming world by storm in 2011, distinguishing itself by stepping away from the established norms, clichés and tropes commonly seen in modern-day AAA games. Its fame is owed in no small part to its much-lauded difficulty, which also tends to be grossly exaggerated. Where so many games today hand the player everything on a platter and go out of their way to ensure that they are not inconvenienced in any way, Dark Souls made the player work to earn their victory, which made the game ever so satisfying to play. It was challenging but mostly fair, and seldom did the challenges require more than patience and some thought to overcome. However, the genius of Dark Souls does not lie merely in difficulty itself, but in how well it ties into the overall theme and plot, as well as how it penetrates nearly every layer of the game. The mythological story is delivered through short pieces of cryptic dialogue and item descriptions that are easy to overlook. However, should the player put in some effort, all the pieces fall into place to tell the story of the dark, dilapidated land of Lordran. Of course, the game is not without its fair share of flaws. Even though Demon's Souls did come 2 years before it, and even though Dark Souls did a lot to improve upon it, the combat remained somewhat clunky and unrefined. Story-wise, Dark Souls is a standalone game. However, those who haven't played the first one might find the narrative a bit complicated, as if the storytelling of these games wasn't already complicated and confusing enough. Finally, we get to the 2020 remake of Demon's Souls, which came as a surprise to many. Though it may have laid the foundation for the Souls series, as mentioned above, Demon's Souls took a backseat and never became as popular as Dark Souls or any of the other Souls-like FromSoftware titles that followed. The game looks much more realistic while striving to maintain the somber atmosphere of the original, featuring new animations, re-recorded NPC dialogue, and a proper orchestral soundtrack. However, while the visual changes do make Demon's Souls 2020 feel like a much more modern game, some feel that it does take away from the original's charm. On the gameplay front, they added new items, rebalanced some of the old ones and ironed out many of the bugs. Most notably, healing grasses now have weight, meaning that it's no longer possible to farm them and potentially carry around hundreds of healing items in your inventory at once. While Bloodborne is not a Souls game, it still follows the Souls formula fairly closely and expands upon it uniquely. It is the first instance of FromSoftware tweaking their own formula. While the Souls games encouraged the player to play it safe and punished recklessness, Bloodborne ditched shields in favor of guns and introduced a more high-risk, high-reward playstyle. Parrying itself was less risky. The trick weapons had two modes with distinct movesets that could be switched between mid-combo, and the ability to regain health by attacking an enemy immediately after receiving damage, all made Bloodborne a fluid and exhilarating experience. This also made for some genuinely nerve-wracking boss fights, and there's no shortage of those. Bloodborne also succeeded in creating a new, memorable world that managed to seamlessly blend Gothic and Lovecraftian horror in one beautiful Victorian-era-inspired setting, packed with details never seen before in any of the previous games. But of course, no game is perfect, and Bloodborne's main shortcoming is its chalice dungeons, the procedurally generated levels that players can go through to find better blood gems used for upgrading weapons. Even though they may be a good concept on paper, the chalice dungeons didn't work all that well in practice. They quickly devolve into a kind of bland grinding, which is the exact opposite of what we would expect to see in a FromSoftware game. Bloodborne was already a departure from the established Souls formula, but it still kept the RPG elements mostly intact. Sekiro, on the other hand, is a far more significant step away from what we're used to seeing in a Souls game. It isn't even an RPG but an action game. It still keeps some basic stats that can be upgraded as the game goes on, and it features several skill trees with various unlockable abilities, but it plays more like a pure skill-based action game than an action RPG. The stamina meter is gone and is replaced by the posture meter. There is only one primary weapon that the player uses throughout the game. Playstyle variety comes down to an array of different combat arts, which resemble the weapon skills of Dark Souls 3 and to Shinobi tools, that are attached to the protagonist's prosthetic arm and function, similar to Bloodborne's trick weapons. In addition to that, rudimentary stealth mechanics were introduced. There is no multiplayer, and the focus switched from dodging to parrying, which is deflecting enemy attacks as it is referred to in the game, all for the sake of breaking an enemy's posture and rendering them open to devastating death blows. Overall, when it comes to the gameplay, Sekiro is probably the most difficult Souls-like game released thus far, or at least the one with the steepest learning curve, which is in no small part thanks to its fast-paced combat that puts even Bloodborne to shame. It also differs from the previous games aesthetically. Set in a fictionalized version of medieval Japan, it is more colorful, and the soundtrack features many traditional Japanese instruments. Even the storytelling is much more direct and far less cryptic than that of the previous games, which is something that some players will like while others will not. At the moment, FromSoftware is focusing on the development of Elden Ring, a highly anticipated title that much to the fans' delight. A proper trailer for the game dropped in June 2021, after almost 2 years of radio silence following the initial E3 teaser in June 2019. For the time being, Elden Ring seems to herald something of a return to the roots of Dark Souls, both in terms of the aesthetics and in terms of gameplay. This was met with some mixed reception among the fans who were expecting something more fresh and original, although others were quite happy to see a proper spiritual continuation of one of their favorite franchises. As for any potential continuation of the Dark Souls series, we can't say anything for sure. The director has stated that he doesn't want the franchise to get stretched so thin that it loses all meaning, which is understandable. Besides, it is a given that Dark Souls will be receiving plenty of spiritual sequels such as Bloodborne and Elden Ring that aim to explore new themes while expanding the gameplay formula in meaningful ways. It is unlikely that we will see any new Dark Souls releases that aren't remasters or remakes. However, we can probably speak for the majority of the fans when we say that we'll be happy as long as FromSoftware keeps innovating and putting out new, engaging titles. So what's your thoughts on the new Elden Ring game? Leave a like and comment below. Are you excited for it? As always, thank you for watching. Peace out.